Hello again. Welcome to another episode of the Mojo AI podcast. I'm here with our in-house safety expert, Brian Camper. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing really well, Jeff. How about yourself?
Doing well. As we're getting into the heart of winter, today we wanted to highlight the importance of winter driving and safety around snowy and slick conditions. A lot of parts of the country in the winter will face those kind of conditions: icy rain, snow, sleet,
Mhm.
cold, frozen roads. And being prepared and training your crews for winter driving can not only reduce injuries and prevent delays, it can save lives. It's a big
Absolutely.
deal for a lot of crews across the US.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And here in Missouri, probably much like Utah, we've got the cold coming in. We don't have too much snow yet, but we have had a little bit of icy road conditions here over the last couple of days, and you see the effect on it. Just taking my kids to school today, there was two rear end accidents that occurred, and you could base them off of those exact conditions that you just talked about.
Yeah, it's similar story in Utah right now. We're cold, but we don't have as much snow as we typically do. We still get black ice if there's
Yeah.
a foggy day. I've been here 25 years, so I'm pretty familiar with driving in the snow, and I always feel like I'm a safe driver. Of course, it's everybody else who's a terrible driver. There's really more to it than that. This is something that everybody needs to take seriously, not just on construction sites and driving heavy equipment. That's what we are going to focus on
Yeah.
today.
No,
Yeah.
100%. I definitely agree with that. And I really look forward to getting into this topic. It's one that I've had a lot of experience with, not only with my work up in Alaska, but the remote work sites that come in oil and gas as well as construction. You end up dealing with really tough roadways and really tough driving conditions, especially in the wintertime.
Yeah. To get us started, I want to share some statistics that we researched for this topic. Over 70% of US roads are in what is considered, a snowy region,
Right.
meaning they get at least 5 inches of snowfall annually, which was a surprise to me to see that number is so high. And additionally, almost 25% of weather-related vehicle crashes occur on those like snowy and slushy and icy roads, which leads to, around 1,300 deaths a
Yeah.
year.
Too
I mean,
many.
that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is really eye opening when you think about that too. But to give you a little bit of an example, even there in California, I lived in Southern California in North San Diego County, and we were 15 minutes away from the beach. And at the same time, within 10 minutes, we could be in the snow during the wintertime. So people don't realize that 70% covers. Snow doesn't just happen along the north part of the U.S. It happens everywhere, and you really need to think about this no matter where you're operating, whether it's California, New Mexico, Michigan, wherever it might be. Winter driving definitely has that effect, and like you said, that increase in accidents that unfortunately can lead to either serious injuries or fatalities. Never mind the delays; it's massive, and especially when you think about with some of the things we're going to cover, how much of that's avoidable, right? How much of that increase could be avoidable if companies and drivers take the time to stop and really apply just some practical methods for winter driving.
Yeah. Before we get into those practical safeguards that people can take, like, what are some of the unique challenges for construction vehicles in winter driving?
The first thing we got to think about when you think about a construction vehicle, whether it's a work truck, a service truck, a truck with a trailer, no one's driving a Toyota Prius really in the construction industry. Everything that we drive in the construction industry mostly is heavy, right? And in winter conditions, one of the number one things that is reduced in any type of condition, whether it's wet conditions, visible, not so much icy roads, cold roads, is your friction, is your traction for your tires. So you get a big vehicle moving, and that stopping time, even the acceleration time, the proper steering of the wheels, all that is reduced. So for me, my number one thing to look for that to really get the people my workforce to think about is that reduction of traction. right? That reduction of traction that's going to happen because of the winter conditions. We talked about it too, just for a second, limited sight. Along this time of year, you get the fog, if you get that sideways rain, or even some of the sleet, you get reduced visibility. And even as a byproduct of the snow, if you're driving through a really snowy road and you're getting the spray off, say, a semi truck there in front of you, like the one behind me, your wipers are going to do so much, but it's going to come to a point where you're only looking through that portion of your windshield that your windshield wipers clean off. So reduce traction, reduce visibility, and also just the outright temperature, right? Because when we do think about winter driving and talk about the things to be prepared for, we have to think about on a construction site, driving to these remote sites, about vehicle breakdowns, right? You've got to be prepared for that. And you have to be prepared to spend, an hour or 2 hours on the side of the road, maybe in -10, -20 weather. Summertime, it's not that much of a problem. In the wintertime, it can become a serious problem if it's not addressed right.
Yeah. So let's get into it and talk a little bit about what companies or operators can do to prepare for winter driving as we move into the winter months. Is there like a basic checklist that people can follow to ensure that heavy equipment is ready to operate safely in the winter?
Yeah, and for me, it goes back to what I just talked about. It starts with tires, right? Whilst we need to be paying attention to our tires all year round, if you work and you operate in an area that is within that winter region area that you're going to be getting snow routinely, you're going to be getting frozen roads, icy roads, you really need to consider making sure that you have the proper tires on your vehicle at all times, right? Because again, the only thing that touches the ground between the vehicle and the road are the tires. Making sure you have some snow rated tires, making sure you're equipping them with chains. And this is something that we always practice too, is know how to put on your chains before you have to, right? As winter leads up, which it's getting here already, but it's still time to practice. Spend a toolbox meeting, have your guys gather around, practice putting on the chains, checking things like the battery. Again, during summertime, we take some things for granted. In the wintertime, especially if you're operating in a cold area, it's harsh. It's harsh on the mechanics of a vehicle. It drains batteries like that for some reason, right? There's multiple scientific reasons, and those people are much smarter than I am. I know that it kills batteries. Make sure that your battery is maintained, making sure that you have the proper battery in your vehicle, that you're not leaving any accessories on that can leave you stranded on the side of the road, because in the summertime it wouldn't, but in the wintertime it's going to kill your battery that much faster. Antifreeze, right, making sure you have the right antifreeze. We don't think about that too much during summertime. We just want to make sure that we can leave the truck on with the AC going and it's not going to get hot. When the wintertime, we got to make sure that the antifreeze, the coolant in our truck, really is the proper antifreeze and that it's not going to freeze up on us and it's not going to cause damage and again leave us stranded on the side of the road. We could talk about stuff to put into the cab, but for me, those three things, right? Tires, chains, brakes. Let's talk about brakes as well. Batteries and coolant, making sure that you're equipped with the proper antifreeze, and that could even go for your windshield wipers as well. Making sure that you have proper windshield wipers. Same thing with your windshield wiper fluid. They do make cold weather windshield wiper fluid that doesn't freeze up. Having that list and developing your own list as you go through your fleet will be key in preparing your vehicles for wintertime.
Yeah, that's a good list. Tire traction is one thing that I've always noticed here in Utah. If you drive on the interstate enough, you're going to see blown tires on the freeway almost daily. And so I've just gotten into the habit whenever I happen to be next to a big dump truck or semi trailer or something, I always glance at their tires. And like when I see those completely bald tires that just
Yeah.
look like they're ready to burst, I just think, how did this happen?
Yeah. No, that's a
Um,
good point.
yeah. In addition to that kind of vehicle specific checklist, is there anything that the drivers themselves need to be doing differently to be ready to drive in different seasons?
Yeah, 100%. And in the wintertime, again, Not just to focus on tires, but when you're doing your pre-trip inspection, although we should be looking at our tires every time for our pre-trip, making sure you're paying attention to your tires. You're making sure that again, we talked about the chains are there, that you know how to put them on. Your vehicle inspection, again, make sure you have some items, maybe such as a squeegee or a scrapers that you could clean the headlights off as you get that salt and snow spray up on your headlights. Same with your windshield and your rear windows and your brake lights. All too often during the wintertime, we see vehicles driving down the road. Their brake lights and everything are just completely frosted over with the dirty snow from their tires. And whilst it doesn't seem like a big deal, if that driver had the right equipment or the fortitude to, when he pulled over, to clean those off, he can prevent or they can prevent a number of potential accidents of people just not even seeing their brake lights. But another thing drivers can do really is be prepared. Besides the vehicle inspection and really making sure you have the right equipment, making sure that you have the right safety equipment as well. We all think we're tough guys on construction sites and on oil and gas sites, but make sure you have extra jackets, extra sweatshirts, even maybe a couple blankets if you need be, right? Pack them in the truck, even if you never have to use them, great, right? But the reality is, if you're broke down out in the middle of nowhere and it's going to be 2 hours before someone gets to you and that truck's not running, it's cold. You want to make sure that you have the right equipment, some extra snacks. I always tend to make sure that my drivers have granola bars, stuff like that, not to snack on just when they get hungry, but should they get stuck out somewhere, that they have some sort of fuel for their body as well, and it will help keep the cold away as well.
Yeah, those are good points. I'm curious too, what can drivers themselves do while they're out on the road? Um, like, are driving techniques
Yeah,
different? And I'm also curious, is like winter driving something that's covered like in CDL training or something like that, or is it left later up just for people to figure out, or employers mandate it? That's a little bit off topic, but
yeah.
to start, like, are there certain things that drivers should be doing differently regarding like how they drive in winter conditions?
Yeah, definitely 100%. And the very first thing, and this is the most important, is just actually reducing speed, right? And applying the rule of driving to the conditions, right? And a great example of that is, I don't care if the speed limit says it's 55 miles an hour, right? If the road's unsafe to go 55 miles an hour, don't go 55 miles an hour. If you feel comfortable driving at 45 miles an hour because the road conditions dictate that, then drive at 45 miles an hour. So reducing speed, increasing following distance, which in today's world is a little bit hard. People are so distracted when they're driving. This is where that term defensive driving is really going to come in. You were talking about it a bit at the beginning, that you feel like you're a safe driver, right? But a number of drivers around you, you feel like you have to defend yourself from them. And there's some truth to that, right? Reduce speed, increase following distance, build that bubble around you. Stay out of what we call the hit zone. What's that three quarters, the kind of blind spots. You don't want to ride right next to someone. You don't want to ride with someone right on your quarter panel, and you don't want to ride on someone's quarter panel. Build that escape zone that if you do have to maneuver, you leave yourself some room. And again, one of the most important things, actually probably the most, your vigilance as a driver in the wintertime has to be on the road in front of you, has to be your situational awareness. In winter driving, if you make these sudden movements, these herky jerky movements, or you have to swerve in the summertime, you might get away with it. Whether it's a vehicle you're trying to miss, whether it's a pothole, or as you said, maybe a piece of rubber laying out in the road. In the wintertime, especially with the reduced traction, you might not get away with it, right? You might actually end up, in a really bad situation. So driver techniques has to be attentiveness, reduction of speed, creating more following distance, staying out of hit zones, creating a nice bubble around yourself, and really being cognizant of what other drivers are doing around you, as well as, again, just being aware of the conditions and making sure. This goes back to reducing speed, but drive to the conditions. Don't drive to delivery. And tying into drivers, this is where supervision can really play a big role in this too, is we know the roadways are going to be bad. We know there's going to be circumstances and different conditions that are going to cause either the trip to take longer, or if we expect it to take the same as summer, there might be some new exposures. Give yourself more planning time, right, on deliveries, or if you're delivering equipment or you're delivering goods or material to a job site. Understand that it might take longer, right? And build that into your culture, build that into your toolbox meetings and into your discussions with your drivers. And to answer the second part of your question, of yes, in the CDL, there is parts about winter driving, but you do really need to develop using a third party like Smith Systems or Fleet Safety International. They both have really great winter driving categories and modules in their training system that talk about the proper techniques. We'll get more into that here in a moment later on about if you go into a ditch and stuff, how to steer out, what not to do, what to do. But these different companies, like I said, Smith Systems or Fleet Safety International, they're absolutely fantastic. And I think it's a great thing for companies to really provide that to their drivers during this time. And that's something that can make a huge difference on whether there's an accident or not.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about how employers and company policies and training fit into this. We talked about taking a look at vehicle conditions and if they're safe for the road conditions, what drivers can do. But do you have any other examples of what employers could be doing to improve the health and safety of their drivers in winter conditions?
Yeah, definitely. So having that preventive maintenance schedule, right, in place, making sure that the vehicles are brought in for the proper maintenance routines, that you're checking, like we keep talking about, we keep going back to tires, brakes, chains, any extra emergency equipment that you deem fit to put on your vehicle, whether it's your flashers, your emergency triangles, your extra blankets, whatever it might be, that's checked. And that's checked in a way that is positive reinforcement for the drivers. We talked a little bit about scheduling, right? And journey management. We'll get into journey management. Scheduling. During these type of conditions, trying to schedule work and transportation of equipment becomes completely driven by the company, right? What routes are they going to take? When are they going to depart? What's the least riskiest route? Might be the longest route, right? If I could get there driving down the interstate and only make a couple turns and take one exit versus taking a back road that's maybe completely windy but not maintained as well as the interstate, I'd rather my driver take the extra 35 minutes to go down the interstate that I know is properly maintained versus taking the back roads that's going to get them there 15 minutes in perfect conditions. So you need to really think about things like this from a company point of view. Journey management, we don't really talk about journey management a lot in the construction world. In the oil and gas world, it's everything, right? But what, or I could see it applies to construction industry, especially during wintertime, is if you're towing a piece of equipment or you're hauling a trailer full of material or whatever it might be to a work site, especially a remote one, make sure that as a supervisor, who's in the vehicle, that the vehicle's been inspected, what route they're taking, right? What they're going to do in case of a breakdown, right? And what is going to be your time to go out and get them. And then on the driver's portion of that, you let the supervisors know when they depart. Again, who's in the vehicle with them, what they're towing, what their route is going to be, and also close it out once they arrive there safely on site. So implementing some policies and procedures like that, as well as just a cultural shift of really putting the drivers first and putting the expectations of work, building in that time to where no one's feeling rushed, right? No one's feeling like that they have to get to a place within this amount of time. Obviously, we want to be efficient, but in the wintertime, we have to build in that buffer for our drivers to make sure that they arrive there safely.
Yeah, yeah, those are all really good points. You've been in safety for 25-ish years. Do you have any specific experiences or lessons learned from winter driving incidents or good outcomes that you've seen throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go back up to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, and we were when we're up there, we work all over the tundra, and we drive these huge vehicles, tracked vehicles all over the place, and everything's just there's it's like driving on the surface of the moon. Everything is just flat, and for the most part, you could go in a straight line. There's little things here and there you have to avoid, but you could take someone from Hawaii, you could take someone from California or wherever, put them in a vehicle up there on the tundra and let them go for it. Give them the training on the vehicle, but they can go for it. Where we ran into some trouble was we were having a lot of transportation done between the hotels and to the rig pads. And they're on these rig roads. They're these semi improved rig roads. And they get iced over, they get a number of things. And we were having people jump into these vans with 10 people in them. And there was no driver selection, unfortunately. Like at that time, our culture hadn't got to that place. And basically, whoever the senior person of the crew was going to drive the van and drive them out. We had a couple accidents. Luckily, we didn't get anyone hurt, but we had a couple accidents. And in finding, going through and finding, we found that the people driving these vans had no proper training in how to drive in winter type conditions. So we implemented some of those systems I had talked about, for example, like Smith Systems or Fleet Safety International, and we brought them in and we really trained all of our anyone that's going to be a driver of these type of vans or even on the crew. We implemented this training program to give them the knowledge of how to drive safely in the wintertime and in winter conditions. And we kept that in process and that was pretty much the last time we had accidents. And we would probably have 10 to 15 trips a day of expediters or F-350 pickup trucks and vans going back and forth. And once we put that training program in place and gave them the tools and we maintained that, and you didn't drive the vehicles unless you were on that list and you completed that training, the accidents went out the window, right? At least the driver error accidents. We had a couple minor things here and there where you couldn't see the shoulder or things like that. But as far as empowering the drivers and making sure that they had the proper training, it was a huge success.
Yeah, I like that example because that sounds like a really simple, very practical solution to increase safety.
Yeah, and it's one of these things that we talked about earlier, just four or five really simple things that you can do during the winter time to help promote safer driving during the winter time, whether it's to the vehicles or even with driving techniques. And it really is, at least on the foundation of it, it's that simple, right? Companies don't have to go in and invest in a huge, massive winter driving safety campaign that's going to cost them more than anything. It's really basic, right? Check your tires, make sure they have the right equipment, right? Make sure they have things to, even small items like making sure they have things to clear the windshields, right? Ice scrapers, the chains, extra blankets, that the drivers are encouraged to slow down. The drivers are encouraged to create more following distance. If you put these things in place, you've really built a solid foundation for a safe winter driving campaign. And then when you introduce things like a training program and a vehicle maintenance program on top of that, you're really insulating yourself from not only potential safety accidents of on the highway. Let's talk about the liability portion of it, right? Every vehicle accident, especially with a company related vehicle, every insurance company is out to blame the company vehicle, right? And if they can get you on anything like the tires or following distance, whatever it might be. So where I'm going with this is it doesn't just affect your safety record, it affects the bottom line, it affects your efficiencies. And say maybe it's a big delivery that you have to make and it's a good project that you had to make on time and you have a major accident out there delivering trusses or whatever it might be and you miss your deadline, that could cost you the project with the next with that builder. So you got to build it into more than just safety and look at it from the operational point of view too and realize that these safety mechanisms that we're encouraging you to build into your winter driving program has a profound effect on the operational side of it too.
Yeah, that's good. And that leads into something else that I wanted to ask about. And that is, for example, if there is an incident, let's say a dump truck or cement mixer like slides off the road in the winter, maybe damages some property, no bodily injuries or something. So, who is going to review that incident? Is it like the highway patrol or something like that? And then, as they do, how do they weigh the different factors like road conditions, driver training, equipment condition? Are they going to look at like company training policies? Do they take all of that in as they're looking to figure out what happened and if it was driver fault, equipment failure, just bad luck due to weather? How does that process go?
So if we're talking about just strictly like something like the Missouri Highway Patrol or something like that, if I'm driving like you said, a dump truck and I slide off the road and go into a ditch and say I knock over someone's fence and cause some property damage, they're going to look at the conditions. Yes, they're going to look at my operator license, make sure everything's valid. They're going to look at the vehicle, make sure everything's operational. If some of those things, like we talked about, tires, right? If the tires aren't up to snuff or they don't have enough tread, or say I don't have the chains, or if they can identify that I was operating at a unsafe speed, yes, they will cite me 100%, right? Me as the individual driver, which then can also bring some liability onto the company. They won't really look into your safety training portions of it, right? Where that would come in is if, say, there is a bodily injury involved, whether it's company related or third party, and say OSHA gets involved, or say, heaven forbid, it gets involved with litigation. Those obviously are going to be subpoenaed and brought forward to for discovery. But that being said, putting things in place, again, we talked about with minimal effort. We're not talking about making world, wide changes. Putting some effort in place to enhance your winter driving safety can really keep you out of hot water with things like this. And if you have that cultural enforcement and that cultural shift, and you're really enforcing your health and safety culture and you want to help drive them forward, again, your drivers are going to feel it. Your people operating your equipment are going to feel it, and they're not going to feel the need to rush to a job site to put themselves in a position like that.
Yeah, all good things to consider. Let's say you are involved in an accident. Say you slide off in your pickup truck into a ditch. What should you do in that situation?
Yeah, this is going to be intuitive to what your brain's going to tell you to do. But the reality is, say you're going into a ditch. Our first instinct is to, especially if we're going in down on the right, is to whip that steering wheel back to the left, right? And try to steer our way out of the ditch. The reality is that takes your center of gravity, puts it up high, and it creates that tip over threat. That possibility of tipping over goes through the roof. Literally, no pun intended. If you find yourself going off the road into a snow covered ditch or into a snowy ditch, the reality is let it go. Steer into the ditch, get into the ditch, straighten yourself out, either come safely to a stop, wait for yourself to be recovered, or if the truck has the capabilities to get itself out, then extricate yourself using the four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, whatever it might be. But you actually want to just allow the vehicle to turn into the ditch, straighten, like I said, straighten yourself out, come to a safe stop, and then reassess the situation. Unfortunately, we have had a number of vehicles in that type of situation that tried to avoid entering the ditch by making a sharp turn, and they ended up rolling over. And unfortunately, I was part of a crew in North Dakota that had a fatality as a direct result of this type of maneuver. So things like that, black ice, everyone talks about it, but again, number one thing to remember is if you do start to slide, don't apply your brakes, right? You actually want to let the car settle. You can even use your accelerator just a little bit to gain traction, right? Get those wheels spinning. The worst thing that you could do on ice is to have wheels that are not spinning because at that point, the momentum and the inertia of the vehicle is just going to go wherever it's already pointed. And you don't turn into a slide, you turn away, right? That way you can get traction. The other thing too is just realizing that looking in front of you and looking at the road conditions, again, going back to drive into conditions is so key, right? I know you asked about what to do if you drive into a ditch, and now we're talking about black ice and whatnot. But I think all these are pretty pertinent to that question. And you could dive into it more with a Smith Systems driving or a Fleet Safety International. But you really have to build that culture with your drivers and your equipment on how to operate and what's acceptable, what not acceptable to do during the wintertime.
So to recap some of the things that we talked about, some pretty simple things that individuals and companies can do to be better prepared for winter driving. Number one, the importance of preparation. You need to be doing regular maintenance and inspection on your vehicles and driver training, making sure that's part of your safety program,
Right.
that everybody who's operating a vehicle in winter conditions is prepared and has the skills to do it correctly. Number two, kind of part of number one, making sure that your crews understand how to drive defensively in conditions, that they've got the proper equipment, that they're doing things like reducing speed, keeping safe distance between other vehicles. And then the third, employer responsibilities that kind of ties it all together, setting policies that allow drivers to be safe so they don't feel rushed or in a hurry, and putting technology in place. It sounds like a lot, but it really is some pretty simple, straightforward things that can go a long way. Brian, can you maybe list off a few outside resources or places that people can go if they want more specific information on any of these safe driving topics?
Yeah, for sure. And just to go back a bit about the resources that are what companies can do, I think it's really important too to mention, and like I said, this is a new trend in construction during this time of year, journey management program, right? And having setting that expectations of your drivers, like of setting who's going to be in the vehicle, what route they're going to take, proper route planning, and it being closed out once they are there at the job site so that you know that journey's been completed safely. That also sets a lot of, we've talked about culture. Think we've said culture now 200 times. I'm sick of saying it myself, but it is important to set that tone, right, with your operators. As far as resources go, whatever state you're operating in, like here it's Missouri Department of Transportation, they have a phenomenal resource if you want to go and look at road conditions. And at least here in the state of Missouri, say if you're planning heavy equipment movements, they can actually tell you, and you could use their tooling on what roads are recommended, what roads will be closed, what roads are going to be maintenance are going to be done on them. I would look at your state's Department of Transportation, like Caltrans out in California, UDOT, is it Utah Department of Transportation? And the same. So I would look at those first, and then as well, again, I keep going back to two brand names of training, Smith Systems and Fleet Safety International. I think looking up those two systems would be huge. And even a system like Safety Mojo as well. And the reason I bring up Safety Mojo is if we want to push out, say as the employer, you want to push out your toolbox talk or you want to push out the journey management process for me pushing it out to you, telling you what route I want you to take, having that ability to do it electronically and like you talked about leveraging technology, I think is going to be massive as well for because it's that convenience factor. So resources, I would definitely look at your state Department of Transportation. I would look at systems like Fleet Safety International or Smith Systems, platforms like Safety Mojo or other online safety system platforms that can help you push out those notifications as well as track driver analytics and track driver behavior as well. That's where I would start, and I would just go on from there. How you're building your system.
Yeah, yeah, all good points. Thank you again, Brian, for joining us for another Mojo AI podcast. Today we were talking about winter driving safety, but I always learn something from all of these conversations we have about different topics. Where can people get in touch with you outside of this podcast if they have questions about anything we've talked about, or they're just curious about how to run a better safety program?
Oh man, just definitely message me on LinkedIn. I could be found on LinkedIn under Brian K. Camper. And I'm always, actually, from the last podcast, I've got quite a few inquiries about the last topic. And I'm always happy to answer any questions, provide any insight I might have, and maybe as well as get a little more in depth than that we can on here as well. And also, even through the platform, my email is brian.camper@getmojo.ai. Be happy to answer any emails that might come across and help you out in any way that I can.
If you're interested to learn more about Mojo AI or our software, Safety Mojo, you can follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. We've also got our podcasts available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it if you check it out, give us a like, subscribe, or even a little review. It helps us get out there and share the message with more safety pros who are looking to run better programs. And if you want to learn more about Safety Mojo specifically, like Brian said, you can find us at getmojo.ai. Thanks for listening and be safe out there.
Hey, can I throw in a little teaser there, Jeff?
Yes.
So, one of the topics that I've been really passionate about, and that I hope that our listeners and stuff will think, the same, is throughout my career, I've seen such a solid pipeline of safety professionals coming from military veterans. And we're currently working on with you and Sam arranging. I won't drop any names right now, but we have a very special guest that we're trying to arrange the next podcast with that highlights that pipeline of the next steps for military veterans to become safety professionals and why it's such a good career choice for military veterans. And I think that's going to be a really cool podcast if I could throw a little teaser out there for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've tried not to hint at it too much, but I'm very excited about this upcoming guest.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, thanks again, Jeff. And again, anyone out there, if you have any questions and you want some more in-depth questions or some more in-depth insight to winter driving safety, by all means, reach out to me. I'll be glad to talk to you.